when you were booking your cruise, did you book it online, offline?
Through a travel agent.
Okay.
Yep.
How did you book your plans for your honeymoon? Online, offline?
Oh, we use a travel agent.
Okay.
Maritime travel.
What about maps?
No, we haven't done, no, this time. I guess we could have. We've had a very bad connection in the hotel. So, but we do use maps sometimes.
We're
at
actually
home.
using
Yeah.
the local tourist map, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did you book your holiday? Online travel agency?
Online travel agency, yes. Lastminute.com.
And did social media influence any part of your trip planning?
Yeah, you actually found a blog, didn't you?
Oh yeah. So we've basically did everything in Florence, Siena, and Pisa because I read a blog which which kind of had the same time frame that we were in this place for. So it was a really good way to do all the things in the time that the blog suggested. So.
And how did you choose your hotel? How do you choose your restaurants? What do you use?
I went onto Hostel World on the internet, and that gave me a lot of options. And from there, I could go on and look at popular restaurants and things. So.
Eccoci qua, di nuovo comincia il pomeriggio finale di BTO e il primo panel del pomeriggio è dedicato, come abbiamo detto, abbiamo tante OTA, ne manca una, Booking.com, che sarà l'ultimo slot di oggi, ma ho personalmente scelto Desso Mahoney di Bookassist che sale sul palco, is coming on the stage with me. I personally choose Des because usually it's fantastic in explain what private hotels should do to compete with the OTAs. So let's see his speech. Thank you, Des, for coming.
Thanks, Giancarlo. Good afternoon, Florence. Giancarlo has given me quite a difficult title, I think, to talk about. It's not my choice to discuss what hotels hate about OTA behavior. But I think it's a really topical point of conversation. Anytime that I talk to hotels, there is an issue about the relationship between their business and the OTAs. And it's important for me to get across here that what I've been doing, particularly in the last couple of months, is talking very closely with hotels exactly on this specific issue. So that I can really get their feedback and not just give my opinion. So this is largely what hotels have been saying to me. And then from my perspective in the direct booking space, I hope to at least point out some potential solutions. But more importantly, I'm actually going to leave you with a lot of questions, particularly for hoteliers, that they need to be asking themselves about their industry to see how the industry progresses. So, hate is a very strong word, actually, and for any OTAs in the audience, I apologize if that looks like a strong word, but the reality is that, in fact, a lot of hotels really love OTAs. They're getting extra bookings from OTAs. It's a lot less effort. There's no question that it's a very, very easy way to improve occupancy, and it's an extremely reliable source of business. The reality is that OTAs do an exceptionally good job. And in fact, that's the problem for hotels, that OTAs are far better at selling OTA or hotel stock than OTAs are. They really are excellent at what they do in terms of how they reach the customer. And that's the big challenge for hotels, and it's a very, very big question that they need to ask. So the question is, at what stage does something become too powerful that it may actually damage the industry itself in some way? Because after all, there needs to be a relationship between the suppliers of the product and the people who can actually sell it very well to the public. That relationship can be a very delicate relationship at times, extremely difficult to deal with. And if I was to be honest, I would say that yes, there are some people who really love the OTAs in the hotel industry, but they really fall into just two categories. One group who really love the OTAs, they are hotels who really understand how to make the most of that relationship. They are not dominated by the relationship with the OTAs, but they use that relationship very effectively in order to drive their business. The other group who really loves OTAs probably don't understand the danger in some of the business that they're doing there. And that group in particular has a very, very bleak future, I think. So what has been happening in this space is absolutely amazing. There have been some incredible changes in online travel just in the last year alone. And just last week, we see that Amazon is getting into providing online travel as well. So now, apart from simply buying your book or buying any of your electronic goods from Amazon, you actually can tap into that brand and start buying hotel product as well. And that's fantastic in terms of the reach that a brand like that can have. But is obviously, again, yet another issue for hotels. It's yet another platform that they perhaps have to be on. It's somewhere else they have to be. And when you look at something like TripAdvisor, which has always been a supplier of solid information to facilitate the decision about booking, they are now moving much, much more towards the fulfillment end or the booking end and towards direct competition with the hotel in terms of providing bookings. And so from a hotel perspective, there's really a very large amount of uncertainty in the way that the business is running right now. And what hotels need to do is they need to understand that these are distribution areas over here, but they need to be working on their own distribution plans in some way on the other side. And even there, we see again a lot of big problems for hotels in understanding how they can actually reach their customer. And part of that issue is that the dominance of Google in order to reach your customer in terms of online search. This is being, I guess, made a little bit more difficult again for hotels because Google is insisting on very high quality original information, mobile compatible websites, and information that changes very quickly. And just for hotels to manage that is actually quite difficult. So hotels are stuck in this middle ground where the online travel agents seem to be pulling a lot of their business. And on the other side, there's a great difficulty in actually engaging with the mechanisms for direct sale. So it's a really difficult time for hotels. And so hate is not really the strong word or the emotion again, but for sure, there's a lot of fear in the industry in terms of hotels. There's frustration with what's happening with this relationship with OTAs. There certainly is a sense of resentment or a lack of fairness in what's happening. And what this really means, I think, is that hotels feel quite helpless about what can be happening in their own industry. So what can they do? Well, I want to actually just give a quote here, if you want to read this. This is a quote from the hotel industry. It's actually from Steve Joyce, CEO of Choice Hotels. They don't take the risk, that's OTAs. They're not putting any capital up, and they're trying to get in between important customer segments. So the issue there is this perception that as hoteliers, we're doing all this hard work, and somebody else is just making profit from it, and they're getting between us and our customers. And that's an industry sentiment that we hear quite a lot. And you know, that reminds me very much of what has already happened in retail. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Tesco brand, Tesco is now the largest supermarket brand worldwide, rapidly expanding. And if you're in any of the countries where Tesco is beginning to dominate, as a supermarket, the impact that it has had on suppliers is absolutely enormous. If you're a farmer producing crops or producing meat, then Tesco is driving your price down to the point where your business is actually threatened. And that's great for Tesco and great for the customer, but for the supplier, it's been extremely difficult because the supplier can't really reach the customer on their own if you're a farmer or otherwise. And actually, it's very, very analogous to what's happening in the hotel industry right now, that the customer needs to be reached, but the wrong person perhaps could be reaching them. And so the retail analogy is a very important one about understanding, if you're a hotelier, understanding the danger of where this industry is going and how the hotel has to react quite quickly to that. And so it's very important for hotels to realize that the OTA focus is on the customer and not on the hotel. And by that, what I mean is that if you are setting up a business where you are taking product and you are selling it, it is not possible, in my opinion, to be on both sides of that equation. You have to focus on one or the other. And the OTA is clearly focused on the customer. And what that means is that as a hotel, you are simply supplying product, and if you stop supplying product, or if your product is not good enough, they simply move to another supplier. So this is not a partnership between suppliers and the OTA, between hotels and the OTA. It is not a partnership. It is a business transaction that says, I'm going to take your product and sell it at a good rate, and if that doesn't suit you, that's your problem. And that, I believe, is why hotels are stuck in this frustration or this resentment about the relationship. Because like any relationship, if it genuinely is just about take from one side, then it is not really a relationship. So this is not a partnership, in my view. And it will be interesting to hear what Booking.com in particular say about the partnership end of that later on. But from our perspective, we don't see it that way. So this is about the customer. And if the customer is happy, then the OTA is winning. And that does not necessarily mean that the hotel is winning. It may mean that segments of the hotel industry is winning, but not any one hotel. And that's part of the problem. And I'll come back to that later on in a second. So why has this happened? Well, let's look at the Trip Barometer survey this year. And I'll just zoom in on the section which basically talks about the difference in perception about travel between the hotel and the customer. 95% of global travelers say that price is important when booking accommodation. And I think we would all feel that that's important, at least it's a figure. On the other hand, 50% of hoteliers believe it's important. So there's a disconnect there. What's happening there? And then if you go further on this survey, 86% of customers believe that previous experience with the hotel is important, and just 33% of hotels believe that. And this is phenomenal, because what this basically is saying is that there's a complete disconnect between what travelers think about hotel products and what hoteliers think about them. And that's something that can be easily exploited in marketing terms by OTAs or otherwise, because remember, they're on the side of the customer. So if you look at travelers, what this survey is basically saying is that travelers are looking for value. And remember, value is not price. Do not be confused into thinking that this is always about low price. It is not. It's about good value. And so if you want to tackle that as a hotelier, you have to have good pricing, but you also have to really solidly explain what your pricing means. And that's where the value is. So sometimes a customer is happy to stay in a 5-star hotel for 300 euros rather than a 2-star hotel for 200 euros, because the perception of value is better at that 300 euro price point. On the other hand, hoteliers are underestimating how positive the experience is for custom. And so we have two different sides of the equation here dealing with value and experience that I believe the OTAs understand extremely well and use it to their best knowledge. I don't believe that hoteliers as a whole are tapping into that issue. So hotels seem to be out of sync with what the industry, what the customer actually needs. And remember, it's the customer that the OTA is focused on. And so what's the result of that? What's the pain for hotels? Well, the pain for hotels is that, as far as OTAs are concerned, they have increasingly high costs. And that's not just for commissions, but it's also for cancellation or move fees where there's overbooking and they're hit very hard on those move fees. And what's probably even more annoying is that in scenarios where the ADR in the industry was actually decreasing, a lot of the OTAs raised their commission. So the OTAs were not losing money, but the hotels were. And there, again, is where some of that resentment came from, because this did not feel like a partnership. And so this is a big, big issue for hotels, and this is where it really starts with the commission issue. So it is, and a lot of people in the industry have said, maybe it is time that the commission structure can change in some way. That you can say, okay, an OTA has to spend a lot of money to get that first customer for me. But if it gets the customer again and again, why do I still have to keep paying a lot of money? Because it already has the marketing ability now to reach that customer. So I certainly would agree with hotels. I understand that the OTA can charge a lot for that first customer, but not for every other customer or every other visit from that customer later on. So the idea that there may be multiple commission points is something that a lot of the larger groups are talking about, and I believe that that could be at least some solution to solving the anger between hotels and OTAs on the commission point. Another point of issue, of course, is parity. whether it's rate parity or whether it's last room available, which is effectively availability parity. And this has been something that was introduced in the industry so that from day one, when hotels agreed with this, the result was that the OTA would always win. Because it's not just about the fact that they can advertise a room on the OTA site at the same price as yours, but as the previous slide before the talk showed, they can now use their loyalty programs to take those rates and target people. And there is absolutely no reason for that person to go to the hotel website because they know that they have the best price. And loyalty programs are really where rate parity and even sub-rate parity for those OTAs that work on net rates are having a huge impact. This is business that's not even available to you because it's private in the loyalty system of the OTA. So rate parity has facilitated that, and unfortunately, that is hotels' fault. Hotels have allowed this to happen. Another area that's very, very strong is this feeling, basically, that in some sort of way, you have to do what the OTA is telling you or you will suffer. It's nice to be on page 1 of Expedia, but if I don't give that rate or last room, I'm going to end up on page 35. I can't afford to do that. So there is this sense of coercion, perhaps, that the OTA is forcing you to do things which are not part of your business plan. And anybody would resent that in a relationship. More recently, perhaps, OTAs in the last few years have moved very solidly into reviews, into reviewing hotels and giving scoring based on reviews. And with TripAdvisor, it's always been fine for hotels. You sign up with TripAdvisor, you can manage your relationship with the customers through reviews. But some of the OTAs are not really allowing that for hotels right now. And again, it doesn't necessarily benefit the OTA to do this. They don't really care if a hotel starts getting worse and worse scores because they always have other hotels to take up the slack. But for the individual hotel, the lack of management of their online reputation on some of these OTAs is definitely a problem. And that has been raised quite a lot for me, particularly in the UK-Ireland market where I've talked to a lot of people about this. Probably the biggest issue that I think is there for the future is the fact that hotels can't really reach these customers fully, that there is not a solid transfer of data from the OTA to the hotel. You may be able to get some of that data, but it's very hard to get, and you certainly can't take it all and put it straight in your PMS where you can use it. So the barrier between customer data and the hotel is a strong one. And in fact, if you actually look at some of the statements from the larger players like Priceline recently, last year Priceline actually described itself not as a travel company, but as a big data company. And they basically said the most valuable thing that we have is our data. But they don't want to share it with hotels. That's perhaps understandable, but nonetheless, it is a point between that relationship, a point of that issue again. One of the strongest areas, I guess, that has started this in terms of the pain that hotels would feel is the value of their brand and how they're projecting it online. And I'll give you a simple example. If you're starting as a customer with a Google search, and you type the name of the hotel right there. So for hoteliers in the audience, what you realize, of course, is that if somebody is typing your hotel name into Google, then effectively they're already your customer. All they're trying to do is to reach you directly. But the result of this is like calling out your name in a room, right? What you would like if I call out someone's name, like Giancarlo, that Giancarlo puts up his hand. But in reality, what happens on Google is that everybody puts up their hand and says, it's me. No, it's me, etc. And the point is that you've actually, as a hotel, given your rooms to all of these people, so you're allowing this to happen. So a number of things happen here. If a hotel is not clever about the way it uses its brand, it actually is competing with itself online. It's allowing the OTA to compete. But more importantly, it now costs you an awful lot more if you actually want to stand out. So what has happened in OTA marketing terms is that the cost of trying to promote yourself has been pushed up by the very fact that you're giving OTAs rate parity and you're giving them the ability to market on your brand. And marketing on your brand, by the way, is something that the large groups have dealt with OTAs, but smaller hotels seem to be afraid to challenge that issue with OTAs. It is critical that you retain control of your brand if you're going to survive against OTAs. This effectively turns out to be an advertising tax at this point. That if you're not actually paying for PPC on your own hotel name, then you're giving that business away automatically to somebody else. And it actually gets a little bit worse because there is one key advantage that OTAs will always have when they use your brand. So if I do another search for this very specific hotel here, for example, and suppose I see a Booking.com advert in this case for that hotel, and I as a customer think, great, that's a good price, I like this hotel, so I click on that and I go forward. And I see my result here, and this is great. I'm getting a lot of information about the hotel, and I'm prepared to book. And then suddenly I think, well, hang on a minute. Look at this hotel down here. This one looks actually probably even better. It's got a better rating. It's in a better location for me. So actually, I'll book this one. So what's now happened is that your brand has been used to sell your competitor. And so it doesn't actually matter to an OTA whether your brand is in the ad or not, because they get multiple chances to sell once they get the person onto the site. The problem for you as a hotel is that you only get one chance. When someone clicks on your name, you have to be absolutely compelling in order to ensure that you gain that customer. OTAs don't really care. They can sell any hotel, so it doesn't matter. And that's a real problem in terms of that brand. And so the end result is that all hotels have been commoditized on these systems. The hotels effectively are encouraged, in fact, to all look largely the same. It's all about price and location. And now it's beginning increasingly to be about your rating score. And if we look at a typical result here, I just did a search for Dublin, for example. I mean, the OTAs do a fantastic job in terms of getting the information of the hotel across, and they have excellent conversion. There's a lot that hotels can learn from that. So if you look at the top one, for example, they're constantly feeding back to the customer that this is a great choice. You've made a great choice coming here. Not only have you made a great choice, it's a great hotel, you should go ahead and book. So it's all this positive affirmation all the time. So they're telling you right there, this is outstanding value. In 2013, this hotel was one of the most booked places to stay in Dublin. Oh, great. Well, then I have to go there. That's fantastic. 58% off. There are 5 people looking at this right now. Great. I've just booked a double room on this. Fantastic. I have to book this hotel. This is perfect for me. Okay? Last chance. We've just got 1 room left. It's 46 euros by the look of that. And it's got a rating of 7.6. Well, that's great. I've got all the information I need to make this booking. That's fantastic. So they're really pushing that issue, but they're encouraging you to say, well, you know, well done. You've actually made a really good decision here. So that's good psychology. But here's something that's very interesting. Look at the difference between the price being shown and the rating and discount. I actually can't read that price. What I'm seeing is I'm seeing a very, very large rating, 7.6 on the right, and I'm seeing a very, very large discount, 58% on the left. So what they're pushing is exactly what the TripAdvisor survey told us earlier. They are pushing experience, which is reflected in the rating, and they are pushing value, which is reflected in the discount. The price is actually not that relevant here, as you can see. And if you actually scan down that page, what you're actually beginning to see is the ratings more than anything else. So it's turning into much more of a ratings issue. So this one's good at 7.6. This one's even better at 7.7. So I'm not even seeing the rate here. I'm just seeing the rating. And in fact, even to prove the point, the next one down is awesome at 9. And they're still there, despite the fact that they actually tell you that they don't have any rooms available. But what they're basically telling you is, this hotel is so good that we've sold all the rooms. So in other words, the rating is a positive thing for you to use. And this is really interesting psychology, because the OTAs can do this, and an average hotel can't necessarily do this. But they need to start thinking about this direction. So hate, strong word. I would say over-reliance is the biggest problem. Hotels really need to gain control of what they're doing in terms of distribution. They need to redress that balance very, very quickly, I believe. So how has this happened? Well, for those of you who remember Kodak as an incredible leader in the world of analog photography, Kodak didn't recognize fast enough that their customers were moving to digital technology and to convenience, and they lost the game. One of the largest companies in the world disappeared. And this can happen because it happened already to the hotel industry. In 1998, 1999, your customers were already online trying to find you, and you weren't available. So that's where the OTAs came from. Hotels didn't understand how to reach their customers 16, 17 years ago, and OTAs took up that challenge. And hotels allowed that to happen. Remember, as I'm always fond of saying, Priceline might spend 80, 90 million on pay-per-click for its advertising. Where does it get the money? It gets the money from hotels. Where does it get the stock to sell? It gets the stock from hotels. So you have given the OTAs the money to outmarket you and the stock with which to do it. They actually don't have money or hotels themselves unless you give it to them. And unfortunately, they're very good at it, because here's the good part about OTAs. Their technology and their innovation is fantastic. They are constantly pushing forward, they are challenging the industry, and they are moving with the customer. Their technology integration and their technology implementation is absolutely fantastic. And there's a lot that hotels can learn from the way that they do that. Here's a statement from Darren Houston. Much more importantly than a source of transactions, mobile is a chance to plumb the end-to-end user experience. So what they're trying to do is reach the mindset of the user and not just get the wallet, because the wallet will come later if someone is already converted. This is a danger for hotels going forward, actually a big, big danger, because, as I said earlier, Priceline now considers itself to be a big data company, and hotels really have very little that they can do there in the way that they currently operate. Hotels really work in small data, not big data at all. And so as a data issue, this is becoming critical. And one of those things, for example, is that OTAs are beginning to move into that part of the business that you thought was yours. When OTAs start buying companies like OpenTable, what they're effectively doing is now booking your restaurant as well as your rooms. And once they start moving into activities in the way TripAdvisor is there with Viator, then effectively what they're doing is they're trying to sew up the entire package so that you're doing nothing except supplying a room. And anything extra that you normally associate with the guest in terms of F&B or in terms of activities is increasingly going to be targeted by the OTA. So just be warned that they're not going to stop at just selling the room. And there's a reason for this, and the reason is that it's always driven by what the customer wants. And hotels have to get away from saying, this is the way our business should be run. Because what you have to do is you have to listen to what the customer wants out of your business and not what you want out of your business. And Airbnb and Uber are two classic examples of disruption in an industry, not because the industry was ripe for disruption, but because the customer pushed the disruption. The customer wanted to tap into something different. In exactly the same way as the customer wanted to drive hotels online back in 1998, and hotels were not ready. So, hotels need to react, they need to lead and innovate and not just blame. But the problem is this is not easy. But actually, there are ways that one can do it. You have to get visible, you have to be able to maximize your conversion, and you have to be able to control your distribution. So as a hotel, you have to do these things, but the point is that as part of that, there's actually a bucket load of things that you have to do at the same time. There is an enormous amount of work for hotels to do if they actually want to have a good direct strategy. And it seems like an enormous amount to actually do. It seems too much and it seems too expensive. But there are ways of doing that. Here's a group that we worked with where we started with them and they were doing just 4% of their business on their own website. And here we are 3 years later, less than 3 years later, doing 10 times that on their website. So there are ways that you can actually tap into direct business very well. And the key area really is focus, that you have to make direct business the core of your strategy. You have to really segment and look at your customer base and really target them appropriately. You have to constantly analyze what you're doing, and you have to be prepared to spend. And one of the biggest problems that we see with hotels when they look at whether it's PPC, website development, or meta search for that matter, is that they set budgets for it. And they say, I'm going to spend 500 euros this month on pay-per-click. And that is the worst thing that you can do, because if you're doing that, you don't understand how pay-per-click works. Because what you really need to do is understand that since every direct customer brings you extra money for the booking, exactly the same customer in the same room, if they're direct, they're giving you more money, then you actually have plenty of money available to do what you need to do. Simple example. If I have a best available rate for 2-night special plus dinner, which is 400 euros, and I put it across my distribution channels like this, then we all know it's very easy to calculate our cost of booking based on the kind of commissions that we're paying. That's just simplistic now. This is not the full cost of acquisition, but let's look at this for a minute. So 4 times more on Booking, 6 times more on Expedia, at least. So what I propose to hotels is that this starts small. Suppose you could just move 1 booking to direct, just 1, every day. So if you could move 1 from Booking.com to direct, you'd save, in this case, 56 euros. If you move 1 from Expedia, you save 84. That's 1 booking, okay? So what you now do is you take that 1 booking, and you don't say, this is great, I've now saved 50 quid. You instead spend that money, and by spending that accurately and carefully on pay-per-click, web development, etc., if you can spend on that 1 booking per day, and you do that every day for a year, you have 20K available to spend on these issues. You take that kind of a budget, you spend it on digital marketing, web design, and promotion, and what happens is that you begin to bootstrap the process and grow it. And so the end result is that for every single booking that you've spent this money on, you're also saving again and again and again. And you build up your direct business in that way, but it is a mistake to say at the start of the year, I don't have the budget to do this. You can create the budget very, very quickly. So it's not really a question of saying, can I afford to do it? It's really, can I afford not to do it? Because otherwise, you're allowing somebody else to take that money and do the marketing for you, which is effectively what the OTA is doing. So the solution is this. The solution is to not look at budgeting every month and say, I'm going to spend 200 euros. But the solution is to say, I'm going to keep spending as long as I get a return. Now, anybody with a hotel who has a bar in the hotel will realize that if I'm selling Guinness, I don't say at the start of the month, I'm going to sell 20 pints of Guinness, and at the end of that, I'm not going to sell anymore. You don't do that. If you run out of Guinness, you don't send someone next door and say, I'm sorry, I'm closed, go next door for Guinness. You buy more Guinness because you can sell it. And this is the way that you have to think of clicks in pay-per-click or in meta-search. As long as I can attract customers and turn an ROI, I should keep buying that. And that means budgets have to stop, and thinking about how you deal with your ROI has to continue. So very quickly, hotels' fundamental problem is they lack collective bargaining power. And what we really need to see is we need to see some way for hotels to actually work collectively together. Is there a way that hotels could actually work en masse? And I don't mean small groups, I mean worldwide. Is there a way that we can not just encourage direct in our hotels when guests come in, but encourage guests to always book direct in any hotel? So help out your other hotels and not just your own. Should we, at this point, start implementing shared loyalty programs? Why have we got groups in single silos and other groups over here when the OTA has loyalty programs across everywhere? Hotels need to talk to each other more. Should we be using shared referrals and online booking? My hotel is full, but you can go to this guy down the road because I know when he's full, he'll send it back to me. So stop thinking in terms of just your hotel. Yes, you can gather data, but the most important thing really is to use that data and perhaps in shared promotions. Is there anything wrong when you send out a special offer? Is there anything wrong with saying, here's another one for a hotel in Rome? I'm in Florence, but there's also one in Rome. So the net result, and one thing I didn't say about this definition of power, is that it is actually possible to contemplate change for something that's very powerful. You have to remember that things always change, and you have to remember that things that seem impossible at any one time actually can disappear quite quickly. The question on the future is, do you actually want to sit back and watch the future happen, or do you as hoteliers want to do something about making it happen? Okay. Thank you.
Penso che Des abbia fatto un gran lavoro per continuare il pomeriggio e ci saranno, vedremo se lasciamo un po' di domande anche per l'audience. Le prime domande però chiamo sul palco Paige Brown, che è il CEO e founder di Bell, che mi aiuterà. She will help me in getting a few questions, be careful, a few questions to Des. And then me and Philip will go around the audience and see if there is any question.
All right, a great presentation. You know, we represent independent hotels too, so it's very near and dear to heart. I don't know if you saw the presentation earlier, the Executive Vice President from Core of Distribution and Marketing He made a statement that they actually feel like they have partnerships with the OTAs. Is that, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, given your point of view.
Well, I do think that the very large brands are in a position to actually dictate terms of contract. They are certainly capable of saying, I will give you rooms when I have distressed inventory, I will give you rates that suit me, and I will ensure that you don't use my branding in advertising. And when that happens, you move from being a simple supplier to actually being a partner. So yes, I think that's fantastic, and I think it's great that those brands can do it. But I don't think that an individual hotel has a strong position to do that at all. And that's one of the reasons why I think the OTA business works so well, because effectively, perhaps they're not even deliberately doing it, but they can certainly use a divide and conquer approach where they're so big that they can basically separate out all the hotels and deal with them all separately. The brands perhaps are big enough that they can deal with that. And when you look at what's happened with Marriott, for example, using booking on their own website now, you see that that partnership can be fruitful. But it's also one getting close to being one of equals. When you're a hotel down here, that's very, very difficult. Yeah. And I think the only way is some way for hotels to begin to organize so that they collectively are strong enough to tackle some of these issues.
Okay, so for those independent hotels that are in the audience, I mean, what is the one number or metric that these hotels should look at every day, that they should use to start to solve this problem?
In terms of a single approach or a single number, let's look at it from the other side. What does the OTA use, okay? The OTA keeps life really simple by saying, my commission is 18%. You don't have to worry about anything else. So there's a single number. The hotel, on the other hand, has to say, how much is it going to cost me to build a website? How much is it going to cost me to do online marketing? How much is it going to cost me to do blah, blah, blah? And I think perhaps the best way that hotels can approach it is to say, how do I break all of that work down into a cost per booking and then do a real comparison between what the OTA is doing and what I'm doing? So a hotel will have to say something like, at the start of the year, I need to spend 6,000 euros to build a website. And it looks like an enormous amount of money to do straight off. But if they're doing 10 bookings a day or whatever, then that's 3,000 bookings in the year. So that website is not 6,000 euros, it's 2 euros per booking. Break it down, I think, into small numbers all the time. Always look at your cost per booking, and that has two effects. Firstly, you really begin to understand your real cost of acquisition versus the OTAs. But when you do anything as a cost per booking, you're putting the cost above the line, and you're putting the number of bookings below the line. And what that says is that if I can increase the number of bookings, my cost per booking will always go down. So if you can actually begin to work properly on this, your cost of acquisition will always begin to go down for direct. It doesn't happen for OTAs. It's either static or goes up.
Okay, so cost per booking instead of any other.
Cost per booking. Always break it down to cost per booking.
All right. So what would you tell someone sitting in the audience that, you know, what's the one thing that they can wake up tomorrow and say, this is what I'm going to do to, you know, diversify or add more channels, or, you know, what's the easy answer? Is there an easy answer?
No, there's no easy answer. Firstly, and that's an advantage again that OTAs have, the OTA answer is quite easy, because if you're doing a bad job as a hotel, they just move on to the next hotel. Okay, so the customer sees it and they just move on. For the hotel, they don't have that choice. So firstly, every hotel is different. Each hotel has its own problems, and each hotel has its own advantages. What I would say is that probably one of the strongest things you need to do is understand your positioning in the market. The best way to do that is to go to TripAdvisor, go to Booking.com, go to anywhere that has reviews, and actually find out what your customers' primary positives about your business are. Forget what you think. I think a lot of hoteliers build a beautiful hotel, and they might have a beautiful atrium and a beautiful skylight, and they take all the pictures of that, and they say, I've got the best atrium in Rome, or etc. But the customer probably doesn't care about that at all. They probably care about something in customer service. So I would say that what you really have to do as a hotelier is understand where your customers are coming from first, and try to market to that. So find the positives and push all your marketing in that direction. Find the negatives and fix them. That's the first thing that any hotel can do. Once it's done that, then it means that all of their marketing and their direction is really targeted towards what the customer wants. And remember, the OTA is winning because they have absolute focus on the customer first.
Okay, makes sense. Switch gears a little bit. You talk a lot about the association of the hotels. I mean, I know we have a lot of associations here in Italy and throughout Europe, but you know, what are they not doing that they should be? How are these hotels supposed to get together and have a better buying power and work together in the future? What's your suggestion on that?
Well, you know, I pose that really more as a question for hotels and the industry rather than an answer. I do feel that a lot of hotel associations are very focused on helping the hotel in certain areas. For example, they have buying power if they want to buy linen, or they have buying power if they want to reduce the cost of the minibar, etc. But they're not necessarily focused on delivering business, and particularly delivering business in the digital channel. I think associations either have to change, or new approaches to association have to change, which focus specifically again on what the customer needs and how the industry can adapt towards the customer. Most of the current arrangements between hotels are really about reducing cost rather than growing revenue. So I think that's a different focus. You know, growing revenue means how do I get more customers in and how do I begin to raise my price? And it's an interesting one, because if you look at what OTAs are doing with hotels, if OTAs were real partners, they would be helping hotels to actually raise the rate, not reduce it.
Des and Paige, I have a question if I could chime in. You mentioned how OTAs are interested in the entire travel experience,
yeah,
which is a good thing. Travelers rarely talk about the airline seat they sat in or the bed they slept in. They talked about what everyone's talking about, the experience, the culture, the people, right? But very few independent hotels reach out to their customers that in advance who've booked to help them plan their visit. So couldn't you argue that the OTAs are doing the right things and the small hotels are not?
Absolutely. I mean, OTAs do a fantastic job. There's no question about it. And if they're moving into end-to-end, they're basically fulfilling a need that the individual hotel perhaps can't reach. But again, I think perhaps it's science fiction to argue about the collective approach of hotels. But if there are platforms that are more owned by hotels for the benefit of customers rather than owned by OTAs, there may be an opportunity for hotels to tap into those.
But it doesn't, you know, for small hotels, it doesn't need to be that complicated.
No.
Yesterday, there was a fascinating panel of concierges from Giancarlo's Hotel, from Venice, the Four Seasons in Milano, and they all told stories, and they're all wonderful, and we love them, and they're engaged. But not one of them told a story how they picked up a phone or sent an email to somebody coming to their hotel before arrival. Doesn't that concierge planning side need to change the way it thinks?
Well, I think it does. I mean, one of the things that hotels are sitting on that they make, in my view, very little use of is the data in their PMS. And the experiential data, for example, that customers are feeding back later, that's not being, in any sense, aggregated and fed back to the customer base to say, we're in a great location, that's true, but here are all the things that can happen, and here are what people have said about that. I mean, there's very, very little use made of the data in hotels, and this is the advantage, again, that OTAs have. It may be small data in hotels, but it's very, very focused. And hotels really need to understand the value in that information, and we talked about that earlier. You know, it's really, really valuable information.
Yeah, being able to use that guest data and know where they want to go, what they want to do.
Exactly, and what previous guests have done. So that's a good recommendation already.
Yep, totally agree. Let's switch gears a little bit. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, you know, there's not just the typical OTAs. We talk about Booking.com and Expedia a lot, but now the world's expanding. We've heard a lot in the last couple of days about TripAdvisor, TripConnect, Instant Booking, and then you have MetaSearch, you know, on the other side, and will Kayak get into independent hotel booking, or, you know, Skyscanner and some of these other partners? What are your thoughts on how a hotel is supposed to balance the CPC and the OTA commissions?
Yeah. Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that MetaSearch at least gives hotels an opportunity to have a relatively even footing with the OTAs. Being able to actually connect through systems like ours or others to actually get your your own rates next to your hotel brand right in front of the OTAs is really, really valuable. There are problems with that. One of the biggest problems that we're currently seeing is that hotels feel that they're in control of those rates, but now you're seeing FIT rates, for example, which are much, much lower, appearing on sites like Trivago. I don't think it's necessarily Trivago's job to police that, because if they're available rates, they're available rates. But certainly I think the challenge for hotels now is to understand that if they are giving rates in some kind of private manner somewhere, the chances of them coming back onto metasearch are very, very high. So yes, it's a great opportunity, but secondly, it really, really requires much stronger management by the hotel of their entire distribution now. And in some ways, this is good, because it really tells a story that we've been saying for many years, which is that hotels need to focus down on less distribution, which is more targeted, rather than a shotgun approach everywhere. And you're now beginning to see the interaction of third-party but offline rates with online through metasearch, and that's a danger if they don't manage it properly.
What do you we have an audience question. Yep. Sorry about the interruption.
Actually, it's a good segue. Quick question, which is, somehow you distill everything down to cost per booking, right? But don't you think that net rates would be a solution too, i.e. if hotels move away from bar pricing and rate parity across all channels and move to net rates? In that sense, you know, they know what they're getting, and if the OTAs can mark it up by 30% or 40% or 50%, it's their, you know, good for them if they can only mark it up by 5 or 6. Because I think one of the challenges is, how do you get commissions down in this environment? And maybe net rates is a solution. What do you think about that?
I mean, net rates, you know, traditionally was always a strong approach. I mean, I do think that the difficulty with net rates, I guess, is when those rates get out and they're marked up significantly, that you end up with some element of, well, are you going to allow me to mark it up by whatever I want, or are you going to try to control the markup in some way? You're giving also the opportunity for OTAs using net rates to perhaps penalize you or direct business in some way by giving a less markup on some hotels versus others. And you may lose a reputational issue there, because you've got two guests arriving at the hotel. One is paying a really, really low rate, the other's paying a really, really high rate. Hotels still haven't dealt with that very well. Airlines have dealt with it no problem. It's perfectly acceptable to be sitting next to someone in a free seat on an airline, and airlines have not really suffered from that. Hotels haven't, I think, because there's still a kind of a service issue there. But there is a good opportunity for net rates, but it would have to be driven by the OTAs allowing it rather than driven by the hotels, unless the hotels, again, are acting in some collective way. But it's a good point, yeah. It's a good potential solution.
I'm curious, you mentioned all the changes that are happening right now with Booking.com and Amazon. Do you think Amazon's going to be successful in launching this hotel business, and how is this going to affect all of the hotels? It's a new era.
Well, do I think they're going to be successful? It's very difficult to answer that if it's being recorded, because someone is bound to play it back to me when they are successful or when they've failed. Here's what I would say. I find it very interesting that a company that has absolutely no knowledge of the space can move into it and believe that they're going to be successful in it. I find that interesting. Now, one of those reasons, perhaps, is the way that brand has become ubiquitous these days. And a brand is sufficient to drive traffic, regardless of what it's associated with. And I think Amazon is basically saying, we're reliable, we have reach, and you can trust our pricing. Therefore, if we're selling hotels, it's no different from selling anything else. So it's what the brand is standing for. What I would be worried is that Amazon have a stated policy, which is a very interesting one, of saying they want to do everything deeper and cheaper. That is their aim. If they can reduce the price of goods and keep reducing the price of goods, then they believe they're winning. Because again, Amazon is very much on the side of the customer, not the supplier. And if you look at what happens with some of Amazon's suppliers on the publishing end, they're really being squeezed on rate. So yes, I think they could be successful, but successful for the customer, not necessarily for the supplier.
Well, and in the definition of what you've talked about, as far as what the OTAs really focus their budgets on, you know, Amazon has they have the traffic, they have the customers waiting.
They have, yeah. I mean, they can
Yeah.
convert it very easily. So I think it could very much be successful, but I actually think it would probably cause, and when you look at also what TripAdvisor is doing, you could easily get into a price war on commissions on the hotel industry as well, which may on the face of it seem to benefit hotels because perhaps Booking.com will say tomorrow, it's not 18% anymore, it's 12% because I'm going to match TripAdvisor. And then TripAdvisor might say, well, it's not 12, it's now going to be 8%. And you could get into that kind of war. But ultimately, anything which is racing to the bottom is not going to be good for the industry, regardless of what side of the fence it's on.
Right. So you mentioned TripAdvisor. What's your thoughts on Trip Connect versus instant booking? And what do you think they're aiming to do? Are they becoming an OTA, essentially, or?
Well, I mean, if you were to ask me, yes, I would say that. I think what they're trying to do is to say that we're an OTA, but we're on the hotel side of the fence. But I do think that they're probably hanging a lot of their business on where this is going for the future. I think they feel that they've got a lot of brand power, they've got a lot of eyeballs looking at them every month, and they need to monetize that. One of the ways of monetizing that is just going into booking, but their original strategy, which made perfect sense for direct booking, was to say that, well, you know, if you're focused on customer experience and they're on a mobile, it's not really good to be jumping out of the mobile and into a website in order to make a booking. And so their solution was quite elegant and made a lot of sense. Moving it onto the web is more like a play rather than a solution that actually suits everybody. So that's a difficult area. I mean, I do think that TripAdvisor also stands to potentially have an issue with its, let's say, neutrality on reputation, that they say, well, look, we're neutral, we're just providing a platform for people to give reviews. Well, how neutral can you be if you're also trying to sell the hotel, right? I mean, if you've got really good rates and availability, is there not a tendency to want to get that in front of people rather than say, no, I'm going to put it at the bottom of my list? So what's that going to do for the ranking and rating kind of system that they would have? I'm sure they've got a solution for that, but I'd like to ask TripAdvisor that question rather than me.
I'm curious as well to see what the traveler response is to actually booking on TripAdvisor. I mean, that's a new, do you have any thoughts on?
Well, you know, I think for the traveler, they don't mind that much because, you know, the traveler has been using TripAdvisor to book on Booking.com or Expedia for years. Another button, it probably is just added convenience. The brand is just as recognizable, and I don't necessarily think it will not have traction. I think it will work. But as I say, I do think there's the issue in terms of the neutrality of what TripAdvisor is trying to do. If they simply become an OTA, then, you know, where are you going to get unbiased reviews anymore? You know, can you really trust it? And this is one of the issues that came up, as I was mentioning earlier, in my discussions with hotels where they are worried about not being able to manage their reputation on some of the other OTAs. Yes, they can do that on TripAdvisor, but, you know, that's one of the advantages TripAdvisor has. And the closer it gets to OTAs, the less of a differentiator TripAdvisor will have from those OTAs. So, you know, it's going to be very interesting in the next couple of years.
We talk a lot of doom and gloom. I think, you know, it's the OTAs run the show, the OTAs take a lot of money. You know, just kind of wrapping up, like what positive takeaways, you know, do you want a hotel to walk out of the room with and say, okay, I feel good about the future and what I can do? And
well, I think hotels can do a lot. But they have to start by analyzing their business properly. They can't, there's no point in simply sitting there saying, these guys are taking all my business, I can't do anything. Constantly, we see that if a hotel understands digital strategy, it can really explain the two key issues here, as we saw in the TripAdvisor report. What is my value? Not my price. What is my value? And what kind of experience can I give you? And what have my previous guests experienced in this hotel? If they can project those two issues properly, then everything indicates that the customer will actually buy into it. So it's about getting those two things right before you start spending money on marketing. If you're spending money on marketing and your message is wrong, then you're really losing. So that's what it's really about for me.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was really as brilliant as I was expecting. So, con Des avete sicuramente preso un sacco di spunti per domande che potrete fare dopo a Booking.com quando sale su questo palco. Quello senz'altro di sicuro.